according to the Child Mind Institute, 50% of children and adolescents will experience a diagnosable mental illness during childhood. And 22% of those are going to have a serious impairment, but only about 7.4 of those children are going to get treatment. How did we get to that place, and what can we do about it? I mean, those are stunning statistics that break my heart. And I want to explore this topic today with a really dear friend of mine, Nelba Márquez-Greene. Nelba and I met 4.5 years ago and became friends immediately. And I love her to pieces. We are connected through loss and through faith and through hope. I admire her professionally and personally, and I am so grateful to get to introduce her to you today. So in case you aren't familiar with Nelba, Nelba, welcome, first of all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Saddleback and Kay and Rick.
Yeah. So tell us just a little bit about you, who you are, your life, what brought you to today.
Sure. So my name is Nelba Márquez-Greene, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I've worked in several different settings. I've worked in community mental health. I've worked on college campuses. I've worked in private practice with children, youth, families, and couples for many, many years. I am the fiercely proud mother of two and wife to one. My husband works in academia, and he is a professor at a local university. And I'm just very honored to be here with you guys today.
Yep. I want to jump back to Jimmy because I'm so proud of Jimmy. Jimmy is Nelba's husband, and he's not just in academia. Tell him what Jimmy does.
My husband has had the great privilege and honor to be a jazz musician for many, many years now. It's what's always been on his heart to do. He's 6'6". And he'll tell the story of how he had a coach in high school who said, you got to pick either basketball or music, and you should pick wisely. So he feels like he chose music, and he's been traveling the country and the world as a professional jazz musician since, he graduated high school, went to college, toured with many, many people around the world. And next Friday, he graduates with his doctorate. So we are really, really proud of that in our home, and really proud of him for that accomplishment.
The fact that he was Grammy nominated.
That's right. He was nominated for 2 Grammys a few years ago for albums for an album that he wrote in honor of our children, of our daughter specifically, and he's a tenured faculty at Western Connecticut State University. So
yeah,
any people
vicariously, I love
if there are any listeners here who have kids who want to study music, Western is a great place to go.
That's so good. Well, Nelba, you founded an organization a few years ago called the Anna Grace Project, and would you please tell us about it and why it matters so much to you?
Sure. So the Anna Grace Project became, for our family, for me specifically, the response to a family tragedy that we experienced, and that I'm sure some of your viewers, some of your listeners today experienced vicariously if they were living in the States in 2012. In 2012, my family and I, we returned from Canada to Connecticut, and we moved to the community and neighborhood in town of Sandy Hook. And we were here for about 4 months when in December of 2012, both of our children were at Sandy Hook Elementary School on December 14th. And my son survived, and my daughter did not. My daughter is one of the 20 children who were killed, along with 6 of their adults teachers in that school. She was killed. And I think my husband and I knew immediately, just based on our many, many years of working with children, working with youth, how we wanted to respond to the tragedy. And while immediately after there were many different movements, there were movements in gun responsibility, there were movements in in so many different things. We knew ultimately that we would have to take a position as a family, and our position was kind of executed through this nonprofit that we started called the Honor Grace Project. And we do many, many things, but among them is take a look at the comprehensive way we can look at preventative measures for addressing wellness and mental health through schools.
I have loved that. I've loved being a part of the Honor Grace Project, pardon me, and the way that you and Jimmy and Isaiah, I want to hear more about that as we talk, as it relates to what we're talking about today. But just the way that you and your family have decided that, well, just tell them what your tagline, your hashline is.
We knew that while the country debated on the many number of things we could have done as a nation collectively to prevent a situation like Newtown, that our family way would be through the promotion of love, community, and connection for every child and family. Understanding that children come, youth come in many different flavors, in many different styles, some that are more likely to have connections in community, more likely to have natural outlets for themselves, and some that don't have any at all. And we took a really hard look at ourselves, and we took a really hard look at our community and said, how do we think this could have been avoided and prevented? And we also took the very brave and challenging steps at looking at the background of the person who murdered our daughter and saying, okay, what could have helped him? What could have helped him make a different choice? On December 14th, what could have helped the community make a different choice? What could have made his mom make a different choice? So incredibly difficult conversations that we had as a family.
And you've chosen, I've heard you say that love wins. And it touches me every time I hear that, because I've seen that in you, Nelba. And it's not just a slogan. It's not just a hashtag. It's the aim, maybe correct, but it's the intention of your heart, and it's the way you've chosen to live your life to find to allow God to bring. I'm going to get myself together here in just a second. To allow God to bring beauty from the ashes of the loss and the murder of Anna, and the way that you have and are continuing to invest in the well-being and the mental health of vulnerable children. And that's one of the reasons that I admire and respect you so deeply. And now I can't even see my questions because I'm crying. But you've done in the Honor Grace Project, and then in your research, as you said, in what could have been done for the young man, the shooter, pretty well known that he lived with some mental illness, was a very vulnerable young man. And you've done some study of what is called adverse childhood experiences. And just tell us, how that's affected where you come from yourself and how you identify with that, what that might mean maybe to some of our listeners who aren't familiar with that, and how that then has an impact on what we can do for children and their mental health.
For sure. First, I want to backtrack for anyone hearing my voice right now. And I want to say that any mom or any dad or any caregiver or any person living at home with a youth or a child who may be diagnosed, or who they have a suspicion that that young person is experiencing mental illness, I want to make it very clear that I know, and I don't want to correlate mental illness with violence. It is much more likely, and countless research proves that young people and adults who suffer from mental illness are much more likely to be victims of violence and not perpetrators of violence.
Thank you for clarifying that, Nelba, because that is such a common myth and misperception that mental illness equals violence, and that's not so. Thank you so much for making that clear.
I think I think what correlating that, and that was one of our fears since the shooting, that automatically we would label or shame people. We actually send when I say we, I mean the mental health community. We send two different messages. One is please get help if you feel like you need resources, and the other is when there's a traumatic event, we automatically start only talking about mental illness and mental health in the media when there is a tragic act of violence. So I want to first own that we've sent confusing messages there, and as Anna's mom and as Anna's family, we want to encourage any person out there to know that we're not buying it. And I love Mental Health Awareness Month because we can start to say, no, we're not going to own that message. We're going to start breaking down some of those stereotypes, and we're going to start using better language and talking about this in a more comprehensive way. That's not to say that I have all the answers, but it's certainly to say that if you're sitting at home and you yourself or you know you have a loved one that is struggling with a diagnosis, or you have been encouraged to seek help, we want you to go ahead and do that. And we know that you want what's best for your child. Now, going over transitioning to adverse childhood experiences, I've had the luxury since the murder of my child, if there are any luxuries in this at all, but I've had the blessing to meet some of the most foremost experts across the world. And one of those individuals who I met is Dr. Nadine Burke. And Dr. Burke was one of the first people who started talking to me about adverse childhood experiences. And it is a concept, it is a framework which states that there are certain events that can happen to you in childhood that can then impact physical, mental, and emotional health as an adult. And there's another expert that I love very much, and his name is Dr. Bruce Perry, and his work talks about the importance of love, community, and connection being buffers to perhaps some of those adverse childhood experiences.
Would you define, what is an adverse childhood experience?
So a really, really good resource is ACEs Too High is a website, ACEs, TOO, high, and you can see the inventory right on there. But an adverse childhood experience, it can include having a family member that suffered from major mental illness and was symptomatic, having a home where you were exposed to violence or the victim of violence through child abuse and neglect, or through perhaps watching mom or dad or caregiver be abused. Addiction is on there too. There are many different questions on the inventory. And one of the most beautiful uses of the inventory that I saw when I met Dr. Burke is that she was finding ways of having pediatricians integrate the inventory during well child visits. So during a well child visit where you would have to fill out that blue form for a child to go back to school that says, we've got vision check, we've got immunizations, that's right, thank you. Then a doctor would say, hey, here's an option, this is optional. Would you consider filling out this inventory? And that inventory doesn't ask you to define which one you have, but it asks you at the bottom to give yourself a number from 1 to 10. So, or from 0 to 10, excuse me, from I haven't had any adverse childhood experiences to I've had 10. So with every number is an increased risk of physical, emotional, or mental challenges, mental health challenges as an adult. So I just found that that was a brilliant use of the inventory. And then what they did, and what I actually saw it in action, is they also worked with a social worker. So they used the inventory to educate the mom or grandma or caregiving family and say, I noticed that your child has a 4 on this study. And that isn't necessarily something that's going to tell us exactly what's going to happen later in life, but here's what it could mean. And then here are some ways we can start addressing that now, which I thought was really brilliant. And I want to say for anyone listening that while adverse childhood experiences are getting a lot of attention now, and I think that's really good, I want to encourage families to know that it does not mean a death sentence for you or your child. It does not mean it's the end. There are many mitigating factors. There are many buffers to adverse childhood experience. And I don't share this very often, but I will share it today. My ACE score, before I even became an adult and was involved in this, my ACE score is 9.
Wow.
So on paper, I don't.
Here. You shouldn't be sitting here based on if we were just looking at paper and your ACE scores. Yeah. You should not have finished college. You should not have had a successful career. You should not have had a
exactly. So
marriage, all those things.
The worst use of an ACE inventory is to look at a child, see that they have a 9, or even look at an adult, maybe in a primary care setting, and say, you have a 9, it's pretty much over for you. Or you're an 8, woof, lost cause, right? Embedded in every step of every process of every inventory should be hope, should be alternatives, should be resources. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I want to ask you some of those specific things and how you're applying that in the Honor Grace Project. But for people who maybe just really aren't familiar, maybe this is the first time they've heard about ACEs. I just want to, maybe go back just a little bit and just give a little more words around what. So it's, witnessing violence in your home. It could be sexual abuse. It could be, a parent is incarcerated.
Exactly.
In the family is mentally ill. And then they start assigning points. You get a point for each one of those, what would be considered an adverse, childhood experience. And the reason why that is important, well, several reasons it's important, but one of the reasons is because it can be a predictor, as you say, to actual physical health in adulthood. These are not just things that affect a child in their childhood. These are things that can affect us as adults, but they also have implications for children as they're going through childhood and adolescence. And some of those children then become more vulnerable to what do children who have high ACEs, what are they more vulnerable to during childhood and adolescence?
Well, I should first say that it's tough to cover all of this in an hour. So I'm going to constantly be giving resources. There's a fantastic TED Talk done by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris on ACEs that offers a really, I think she does as well as she can in that 18-minute TED.
It's a great TED Talk.
Right. It's a great TED Talk that really talks about ACEs in childhood and the impact on health and why looking at trauma and ACEs is so important. So first I'll say that. And then secondly, I'll say that there's no one way that a child with high ACEs looks, right? What we see in the classroom is many, it can be many different symptoms from children and youth who internalize symptoms of living in a home with chronic exposure to violence or chronic exposure to poverty, or, I've got a parent who's in jail and I don't know what to do with that shame, to students, children who externalize and maybe get in trouble or maybe hurt other children or maybe aren't doing homework. So there is no one picture for what anyone would look like. I'm looking at my own experience, right, with an ACE score of 9. I was a really great student. I did everything I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
I didn't struggle academically. So some students with high level of ACEs will struggle academically. Some will not. Some will struggle with peer relationships. Some will not. But what we know is that universally, what is can be a buffer, whether you are a 1, 5, or 10, or anything in between, are relationships. Healthy relationships with adults and peers seem to be a great buffer for some of the damage and challenges that a high level of ACEs can offer a child or even an adult. So if a student in a school, in a community, has even one person with whom they can connect, it's
stunning what happens.
exactly. It can open, and that's something that I always had, right? I always had, no matter how difficult things were at home or, with the violence, there was always one person. So what we encourage, one of the things we encourage through the Honor Grace Project is, you either need that one person or you are that one person for someone. And often you will be both.
Hmm.
So a teacher, there's no way we can put on teachers the pressure, in addition to everything. And I just want to say, may God bless all teachers across America, many of whom can't listen to this because they are in classrooms teaching right now. So we should not be expecting that it's just, this really has to be a community model of care for students.
Well, unpack that a little bit for us, because you're got a little bit of echo there. I don't know if it's just me. But you've said something really important, that it's not just parents, it's not just a teacher, not just a coach, not just, a physician, but that that each of those plays a part, and that at a community level, we have to take seriously the health and the well-being of children. So explore that a little bit of what you're doing with the Honor Grace Project to address that in Connecticut, where you're living.
Well, I should first tell you that we are one of Connecticut is a little state with a lot of love, and there are many providers and many groups and many organizations, many nonprofits, many individuals who are passionate and very concerned about the well-being of children. And we are just one small part of that.
But you're my favorite one. So
in the community where we work, we have a very many willing districts that okay, so here's the thing. No one wants to be the district where a Sandy Hook happens.
Right.
That's a given.
A nightmare for anyone.
It's a nightmare for any. No one gets into teaching for that to happen. I mean, it's just let me get my tissue now. But no one also gets into teaching so to see any child fail. And Sandy Hook is a huge tragedy that everybody knows about. But in districts across the country, what we have are children hurting and students suffering silently from tragedies that never make the news. So no district wants to ever be in the position of not meeting the needs. Our districts, however, are chronically underfunded. So it's this, how do we address the needs of students that are increasingly getting higher and kind of more pronounced, and meet their academic needs, and now meet these social needs, these emotional needs, these mental health needs. So we offer resources through something we call Love Wins, which is, I have to give many shout outs here. We partner with a local mental health agency called Klingberg Family Centers. We also borrow interns. I work with a local university named Central Connecticut State University. Hey, CCSU, Blue Devils. They're just amazing. And together we have a presence in local schools and elementary schools. And we work in two parts. One, if students or families identify that they want care that's available within the school day. And the second is through extension activities, through just being present in classrooms through the school day. So if we need to work on calm down techniques, if we want to introduce concepts of yoga or meditation, or if we need to be there for a student, that doesn't necessarily need formal therapy.
Right.
Just kind of informal intervention. We're there for that too. That doesn't happen. I just want to make it really clear, just for me. That happens through lots and lots of groups working together. I kind of see myself as a, I collect goodwill, and then we,
Yes.
you know, there's so many people who want to do good stuff, and we harness all that positive and great energy, and we go back out and give it to schools. And that's just kind of what we've done.
Yep, I love it. Nelba, you also are really passionate about communities of color and what happens to children, particularly that are in communities where there's a disparity between access to both in education and healthcare. And I just know that's a particular passion of yours. Talk to us about that.
For sure. So my husband is African American, and I'm originally not from here. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, and
that was, you didn't see it but I just did a little my spicy dance. That was
okay. Let me see your spicy dance, Kay. Okay. We're gonna work on the spice, but good effort,
it, baby. That's it. You got it all right there.
Good effort.
That's my one move.
I like, and mostly I like that you try and that you're vulnerable.
Oh yeah.
You know, we didn't live in Newtown very long before this shooting happened that took our daughter's life. And having grown up in communities where many, many kids were impacted by tragedy, and many even through gun violence, we knew that if Anna had died in another community, that it may not have garnered the same attention that her death got because she died in Sandy Hook. So I'll try to explain it in this way, and I hope your listeners will follow. Sometimes Jimmy and I eat places that serve buffet style. And my husband is 6'6", and he weighs about 300 pounds.
And you're like
4'11", and I don't weigh 300 pounds. So we'll go up to the buffet, and someone will look at him, and they'll look at me, and the result is our plates look very different, right? He'll get 3 pieces of chicken and lots of potato and, you know, a vegetable, and I'll get 1 piece of chicken and very little bit, like a spoonful of rice, and sometimes I'm hungry and I want the same amount. Yeah. And in a different way, but using that same spirit, the same happens with access to healthcare and sometimes our delivery of healthcare services to communities. Every person has biases. I don't care who you are. This is not a slamming of a particular race or culture. Every person, including providers, including teachers, including ministers, we all have biases.
Right.
So if we don't examine those biases, we can, whenever I've gone back to a buffet server and said, I've noticed you've given me less food than my husband, they've always been very apologetic, but I've had to point it out. And sometimes our families won't know that they're not getting quality care, and they won't know to go back and ask for more. So it's on us to ensure that when we are delivering services or building care models, that that people who may not be able to, I'm trying to use very careful language, but let me not. But that our Black and Brown communities can access them, our other vulnerable children can access them, because we know that bias impacts care. That we know. That's not a personal thing. That's a research thing.
Yeah. Hello, whoever's on your phone.
Sorry.
I expect mine to ring at any moment because it just always works that way.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, you can just say it. I mean, we're just having an honest conversation here about you know, what happens in the disparities that exist in our country, and the things that we have to do to address that, and not just be okay with the status quo.
So how that, oh, here's a very relevant and very clear way that plays itself out. Newtown had this incredible tragedy, and we received millions of dollars in support care. And when I say we, I don't mean me as a person, right. I mean the community and the school district. Where the school district where I work and run the Honor Grace Project primarily, in the town and the community where I do so, they rank 167 out of 169 in per pupil spending.
Wow.
And that means that we are constantly looking at ways to do more with less. And it is quite the struggle. Most of our families, or many, I should say many of our families, of our students come from backgrounds where English is not the primary language spoken at home. Just after the tragedy in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands with the hurricane, we absorbed many families that came with no additional funding. So what do we do then in communities where not only are our students facing ACEs and our teachers struggling with how to deal with that, but then you have on top of that perhaps chronic poverty or racism. It's just even more eye-opening, and I'm so grateful to. So you're probably wondering, well, Nelba, why do you do what you do in another community? It sounds like you're not working in Newtown. Well, it is an honor and a privilege to walk and work in a community where I immigrated to in 1977. And that's where I chose the community where I came to and where I work now. And the name of it is New Britain, Connecticut. And it's just an honor to be there.
So just a couple other things I was thinking, both from the idea of ACEs and how you mentioned a few minutes ago about how if there was just one person, in a child's life who they could really securely attach to and feel connected to. So two things. One, just, tell us a little bit more about attachment and connection. And then also just if you feel comfortable sharing a little bit about what you call your firehouse moments and how that affects your faith. You are a woman of faith. You love Jesus. And so any of that, I love the idea of just giving people a little more ideas about connection and attachment. And then you as a woman of faith, how that influences really and colors everything that you do.
For sure. So we know that as early as when baby is in belly, that is when this attachment starts and is important. And birth to 3 are those years where much of this work needs to be focused on. So I'm pro any policy that helps moms and dads or caregivers and babies have time home to bond and connect with a child, because those early years are the formative years for connection and attachment. So we know that if a child and a caregiver can establish, and there are many different attachment styles, but what we want is to establish a secure attachment style. And if a child can just have that, and that is usually determined from baby in belly to age 3, that's when that's formulated.
What does that mean? What is a secure attachment as opposed to an insecure attachment?
A regular, predictable pattern of support when needed. So something as simple as when baby cries, is there a response? There is there can be a difference between the brain development of a child that is neglected, perhaps left to cry nights on end, versus the brain of a baby that, when they cry, is attended to. When a baby coos, is someone looking at it? Is someone responding to baby signs? That's really, really important.
And it has effects really for the rest of our lives, affects really how we relate to each other for the rest of our lives.
It impacts even partner choice. So if you have a secure attachment base, you'll be looking for that and able to provide that perhaps when you pick a partner for life. If you were raised in a home where you have disorganized attachment or just a kind of unhealthy attachment style, it impacts even that relationship you have as an adult.
That's a whole thing. We might come back and do something more about that at another time. Just kind of as we wrap up, you know, as I said, you're a woman of faith, and you and Jimmy and Isaiah faced the hardest thing that any family can face, and that's a murder of a child. And, you know, just how you've managed over these 5 years to get out of bed in the morning, and what that did in your relationship to God, what it's done in your relationship to getting out of bed and finding hope again. So and you can go, you know, it can be 3 seconds, it can be whatever you feel like sharing today.
I will tell you that I'm in the process of writing a book proposal, and I don't know yet what the title is going to be, but I know that there's going to be a chapter, and that there's going to be a chapter called When Jesus Sent the Women. And I don't know that I would be where I am without the amazing and incredible and faithful and strong and articulate and beautiful women that God has allowed me to meet on this journey. It is an honor to be here. It's also heartbreaking to be here, because I'm here with you today in part because I lost Anna, and in part because you lost Matthew. And yet I know that I wouldn't be standing here without your testimony. And there are so many different points in the post Sandy Hook journey that I thought, that's it. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. Forget this role model thing. Forget this building a nonprofit thing. Forget this getting out of bed thing. Never mind the extra. But then Jesus sent the women. And it is through that community of faith and just believing forward that I think I've taken one step after the next step after the next. And it goes to show you, circling back to the beginning of the conversation, how important love, community, and connection are, right? And everybody in your circle doesn't have to be the same, right? Who would have thought that you and I, with our vastly different backgrounds, would have this connection? Yet God saw fit for that. So I want to encourage folks still listening that diversity is important and beautiful and something we should not be afraid of. And this is actually incredibly healing to have people that aren't exactly like sharing my background for the work and to move forward.
I love you, Nelba. You know that. You are dear to me, precious to me. Yep. I can't do it. I'm so bad at these things.
You're doing.
Yeah, you know, I just,
my favorite
whatever.
Thing was your dance. Your dance.
Hand signals. I can't do any of that. But I love you. I love you personally, and I love you what you're doing professionally on behalf of children and their families. I love the way that you're honoring Anna's life, her beautiful life. I love the way that you're raising an amazing son in Isaiah. And I love the way that you walk next to your 6'6" giant of a husband, who is not just a giant physically, he's just a giant of a man. He's a good man. And the three of you, and four of you, Anna is with us, and we know that. And I love you, Nelba. I thank you for what you're doing. And it's been just amazing to talk to you today. And we will talk offline, because this is not just an online thing. We love each other.
And we want to wish you the best in your series, and we want to encourage people to keep watching and to, no matter what, keep hoping.
Absolutely. There's always hope. Love you, sweetie.
Thank you. Love you too. Bye-bye.